All right, welcome everybody for the third forum launched by Dr. Edward Lazansky on behalf of the American University in Moscow, as well as in conjunction with the Rising Tide Foundation, International Dialogue in Times of Crisis. We conduct such roundtables featuring some expert discussion, a lot of conversation with international audiences spread out all over the world. Everybody who is really motivated to have a future for themselves, for their kids, for their grandkids, and for humanity more broadly. So these discussions really are very important, and we need more of this to happen. We need this to be to go viral in a good way, since we are at a moment, an existential moment for humanity right now, where we have a limited window of opportunity, which is closing fast, to really wake up, learn some lessons of the past, as well as look to the future with a real focus on problem solving, with a commitment to the sacredness of human life as primary to all other things. So we have an economic crisis that's striking the entire Western world. We have an emergence of a new multipolar structure around the BRICS nations and their growing array of allies. We have a paradigm focused upon war avoidance, building large-scale investments into the future, into reconstruction. And then we also have a very dark age mentality, a new crusader ethos, which has done a lot of damage to humanity over the past millennia and has unfortunately become has made a comeback since 9/11. So now we're entering the first year anniversary of of something that was launched about a year ago, on October 7th, in the Middle East, which is another spark plug for a potential breakdown into a degenerative crisis for humanity. We've got a lot of fronts, the front in Ukraine, the front increasingly in the Pacific NATO around China's perimeter, and other things. So this is the point of these discussions, is to get people to think holistically, to think about causation, and to think about solutions all at the same time, which is a challenge, but it's the one that I think we're all able to meet. And so we've brought together a variety of speakers today. We have Alistair Scott, we have Marty Sieff, and we have Anton Chaitkin, who will be featuring or opening up with some formal remarks. And like usual, afterwards, we'll do about 30, 40 minutes of Q&A, some dialogue with the audience. And like usual, I ask people to leave your put your name, ideally, in the chat box, and I'll call upon you in queue if you have a question or a thought you'd like to share for this discussion. So without further ado, Alistair Scott.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to wherever we are. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Alistair Scott. I'm a regular contributor to the Russian publication Russia News on Anglo-Russian relations and Russian affairs. My work's also been published in several other Russian titles, including having been invited to present a paper on the resurrection of Europe to the influential yet sometimes controversial Academy of Geopolitical Problems in Moscow. I have a background in UK politics, having been a party official of a major British political party, however, with no party affiliation today, I should quickly add. I'm an advisor to the chairperson of UNIT, which is an amorphous entity that has consolidated highly trained and vetted defense and intelligence personnel from different nations in preparation of countering any global crisis through concerted pooling of talent, resources, and skills. And as a historian, I've consulted a number of historic novels and award-winning television series. I'm currently the official historian for the Ancient and Noble Order of Knights Templar. Today, I'd like to talk about Ukraine. My efforts today are focused on Ukraine and the unjust propaganda war being waged by Western governments and the media. The big lies, I refer to it. I'm a committed proponent of the concept that Ukraine returns to its historic roots within the Russian Federation as a member republic. I believe that not only are the reasons for this compelling, but in fact will be the only way forward if stability within the country and region is to be maintained as we move into the future. So, let me briefly go ahead and talk about my thoughts. As the US and its allies ramp up support for Israel, Kiev's situation looks even bleaker, and we're now beginning to read even more about the claims of the vultures circling overhead who are looking to grab a piece of what is left of the country following the cessation of hostilities. They believe they have some kind of right. We can look at this in more detail a little later. However, if we are to look at the situation realistically, What needs to happen is provide a solution that ticks all the boxes, but the overriding factors being the security of Russian borders, alongside guaranteeing the hard-fought core objectives of the SMO being not just a short-term fix, but permanently enforced. With these absolute requirements in mind, there's only one solution to the Ukraine problem. The claims of Poland and Romania, whilst having a degree of historical credibility, lack even the most basic of requirements to enable Russia to have the objectives of its SMO safeguarded going forward. Poland is a major NATO and US enabler, with more than 10,000 US troops in the country, backed up by air support. This fact alone makes Poland an absolute non-starter in any negotiation over the future of Ukraine. Romania homes about 3,000 or so US troops, the number of which, like Poland, will be higher at this time. How can such claims possibly be entertained with any degree of seriousness? Simply they cannot. Russia will not deviate from accomplishing the stated objectives of their SMO, but beyond this, in order to secure and ensure that there is no return to the totally unacceptable actions we are witnessing, perpetrated by the government in Kiev, by the way, under the direction of her Western masters, only a direct, ongoing partnership with Russia can hope to achieve this. It needs to be guaranteed for future generations. The stark reality here is that 30 years of Ukrainian independence has brought nothing but disaster to the country. As part of the USSR, Ukraine was a more prosperous region with its heavy industry to the east and rich agricultural lands more westerly. Not for nothing was the country known as the breadbasket of Europe. Following the dissolution of the USSR, Ukraine claimed its independence, despite not ever really having been an independent sovereign nation. The very name Ukraine, as we all know by now, being a Russian translation of the word frontier, as this region was indeed historically the frontier of Russia. We must also consider who in reality should have any right to claim territory at the conclusion of hostilities. We've already touched upon one of basic nefarious complaints from US puppets and NATO members, Poland and Romania, which have no real validity going forward in providing an acceptable solution for Russia. The very idea of statehood for Ukraine has been nothing more than the creation of a vehicle by known actors whose sole intention has been to utilize this vehicle in order to weaken Russia as a means of maintaining global dominance, leading to the ultimate stated goal of breaking up the Russian Federation and taking control of their natural resources. It's not lost on those same Washington elites that Ukraine itself is sitting on vast mineral deposits, a point which even the media has reported following the pronouncements recently of Senator Lindsey Graham. In talking of the media, we're reading and hearing increasingly of negotiations. But who are these parties that will be involved in any negotiations, and what exactly will they bring to the table? Kiev has been utterly defeated on the battlefield, with their sponsors NATO, the EU and Washington unable to alter the course of the war in Ukraine's favor. This begs the question, what exactly does any of this unholy alliance have to negotiate with? The answer is quite simply nothing. If media reports are to be believed, then it would appear that the next leader of Ukraine will be the choice of either MI6 or the CIA. I mean, what is this nonsense? It only goes to prove that what would be in store for Ukraine and its now beleaguered population is going to be more of the same. It's about time that we all stop killing ourselves and sought to resolve the situation once and for all. There is no negotiating position for Ukraine or Washington and her allies. Their war is lost. Ukraine has been defeated. It is time to reform and rebuild. No more of the obscenities we have learned about from the enlightened media, the bioweapon research labs funded by Washington, the despicable trade in human organs, people trafficking, endemic corruption, which has destroyed the economy, state theft, the billions which have been stolen by those that were meant to serve the people and not themselves, the cancerous promotion of Nazism, Russophobia, and the intervention of foreign powers in pursuit of political agendas. The ongoing security of Russian borders and that of the Russian people is sacrosanct to Moscow. The list is long and very depressing to read. However, the answer to this is a very obvious one, but not one we ever see talked about in the media, as it's unpalatable to the Western allies. And that is the dissolution of the state of Ukraine and its return to the successor of the USSR, the Russian Federation. Only this will guarantee the future of the country with all of the benefits this will bring economically, culturally, and socially. From Russia's point of view, the security issue, which is perhaps the major concern, will also be solved with a stroke. The machinations of unfriendly nations, as has been seen the case in Ukraine for decades, will be a thing of the past. Those nations will be put on notice. Ukraine is once again part of the Russian Federation, so interfere at your peril. So, Russian border security will be an absolute. Borders of Ukraine will remain unchanged. However, these borders will now represent a Ukraine within the Russian Federation, with all of the security and political implications this development will engender. We must address the proposal of dissolution, which to some observers will appear radical or even unacceptable. However, the international community has accepted the dissolution of Nagorno-Karabakh as a solution to the ongoing problems between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Therefore, the dissolution of Ukraine can and should be accepted as the only realistic solution in order to preserve and restore the country. There are, of course, differences here. Mainly, there was no strategic or economic value to the West. At a stroke, however, what might appear to be a radical action, yet as we just noted, is in no way setting a precedent. Moscow's valid concerns over the security of her borders and the Russian people will have been negated. Given the history of Ukraine, which has been indisputably linked to Russia by blood and culture for centuries, this could only be a positive way forward. Objections, however, will no doubt come from those countries harboring a duplicitous political agenda, which inevitably go hand in hand with major corporations run by self-serving elites who had been anticipating huge profits as government contracts were doled out. The benefits to Ukraine as a republic within the Russian Federation are considerable. A republic is often a separate small country that has become a part of Russia, having their own cultural traditions and even language. The federal government in Moscow guarantees the protection of these cultural traditions and language so they are not lost. Russia is proud of its diverse population, multicultural background, and languages which have all been present throughout its long and often turbulent history. It is, however, this very diversity, united in its love for the motherland, which has held the country together through these turbulent times. As has happened in the Donbass and Crimea, all Ukrainian citizens will become Russian citizens. They will not be treated as second-class citizens. They will not be used as vassals to further a political agenda, as has happened with US interventionism. In the Russian constitution, all subjects of Russia have equal rights. There is no tier system. There is no racism. In the constitution, a republic is described as a state being part of another country. The republic does have some additional state powers, one being that the republic has the right to establish its own state language alongside Russian. There is no pressure from Moscow to mandate Russian as the sole language. Customs and traditions are not only safeguarded within the Russian Federation, but encouraged, not demanded. The constitution, however, does not allow any other sovereignty other than the sovereignty of the multinational peoples of Russia, and therefore the Russian Federation. So for Ukraine and its people, language, culture, safeguarded and guaranteed by Moscow without the prospect of outside interference. As a republic within the Russian Federation, this does not, however, include the recognition of sovereignty. Rather, it will reflect Ukraine's historical, national, and cultural status, which is inextricably linked to Russia. Following the cessation of hostility, there will be an urgent need for the restoration and redevelopment of essential services, housing, and the economic structure of Ukraine. In the press, we read constantly of Washington handing out contracts to their favored corporations who undoubtedly have a stake in government and a hand in their pocket. Unlike these huge corporations, which are looking to reap equally huge rewards for the contracts they are doled out to them, Moscow, as has been shown in regions of the Donbass, will be undertaking this very same work with only the rebuilding of the country as its only incentive, not for profit. The federal government in Moscow sees the financial support of the regions as a tool to equalize budgetary security of the constituent entities of the Russian Federation. None of these benefits, which will be essential for the recovery of every aspect of life in Ukraine, will not be provided in any other scenario save for the country's return to the Russian Federation and the constituent republic. Having secured the objectives of the special military operation, the road to recovery for Ukraine must commence without delay, without any interference from those nations whose only motivation is exploitation for profit or strategic political agendas. It is precisely such divisive practices have been responsible for driving Ukraine and her people along a path to destruction. Yet these very same nations demand to be involved directly in the mapping out the future. How can we take such claims seriously? Russia and her people have a long history with Ukraine, stretching back centuries, with Russian blood flowing through the veins of the nation. Ukraine has never been so successful as it has been with Russia, both economically and socially. Kiev's dalliance with the EU has made the country even poorer, as other member states have sought to take advantage of her economic ills and cheap labor force. The ongoing policy of interventionist strategies promoted by Washington in order to destabilize the country, subjugate its people, and hijack its history, culture, and traditions must not be allowed to continue or reoccur in any shape or form. The security of Russia, her subjects, and her borders is sacrosanct. The Ukraine experiment, sponsored by the Western allies, has failed dismally. It has only served to strengthen Russia militarily, economically, and in terms of global reputation. If Ukraine is to move forward as opposed to sink further towards terminal decline, then her place is back with Russia for all of the benefits and more, as outlined earlier in this presentation. There can be no other option for Kiev and her people, and for Moscow, if sanity is to prevail. Any other solution to the Ukraine problem is unworkable, it is unrealistic, and should not be acceptable. Ukraine's recent incursion into Kursk, with the undoubted backing and support of NATO actors, has given great attraction to this proposal, although not in the media so much as within the Russian population. Dmitry Medvedev, on several occasions, has raised this issue, particularly in reaction to what he described as terrorist activities perpetrated by an illegal Kiev regime. And this style of rhetoric is undoubtedly gaining that traction, which will not go unnoticed in the Kremlin. My own belief is that Medvedev, who after all has been tutored by Putin himself, is being used as a stalking horse, a sounding board, if you will, and the kind of language being used by this once mild-mannered lawyer from St. Petersburg was at times might appear overly zealous, as getting across a message that might not be far too removed from the thoughts of many a Duma representative. And let us be frank here, nothing said that contradicts the thinking of President Putin. In closing, I cannot believe for one moment that this is not a proposal being actively considered by Moscow, nor is it a scenario that has not occurred to the Western allies. Given recent actions by Kiev and the ongoing threat of longer-range weapons being used against Russia, it is no longer a question of if, but when this will become Moscow's official policy on Ukraine, declared or not. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Alistair. And yeah, indeed, I just want to really reemphasize the fact that for those who are also listening to this recording, what we are trying to do with this forum is to bring together people who are experts in their field and who have a strong sense of the future and a strong sense of causation of our problems. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we, as the American University in Moscow or the Rising Tide Foundation, endorse all of the views. However, it is very important that these views be expressed and discussed, because this is shaping our future and shaping reality as we know it. These discussions are happening. Everything Alistair just said is absolutely true. These are real conversations that are going on, and it might be for the best at the end of the day. So we'll see where things go, but it's very important that we have these types of conversations, bring it out into the open and speak the verboten, because there's certain electric fences that we're not allowed to speak about in public in polite society. So thank you, Alistair, for doing that. I also have I'm going to have a question when we're done the formal remarks on what you just said as well, and then we'll open up for everyone else. But first, Marty Sieff has some formal remarks as well prepared. Marty, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Matt. Just one brief self-indulgent comment before we start, and that is thank you for particularly teaming me on this panel with Alistair and with Anton. Anton has been a very dear friend for me online in recent years, and this is my first direct contact with you, Alistair, but I have admired and been in awe of the courageous and outstanding work that both of you have done in the face of so many difficulties for so long. So it is for me a privilege to be associated with you. Now, my formal comments here. Among many other things, I've served as a professor of transnational crime and terrorism at Bay Atlantic University in Washington, D.C., and I was Count Arno de Borgrave's right-hand man in setting up his pioneering transnational crime program 15 to 20 years ago at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. The program was quickly staffed with and has been tightly controlled by a mafia of Midwestern ex-US Army lieutenant colonels. And once Arno passed away in 2015, I bowed out immediately, knowing that there would be no future there for me anyway. Unlike the Biden administration, and on some occasions, I believe in and practice the principle of strategic withdrawal. However, my key expertise, which I hope to bring to you here, is the nearly 39 years so far, since January 1986, that I have spent continually, covering US, Soviet, and US-Russian relations, as well as domestic US politics, especially on the national presidential level, for various major news outlets. For 33 of those 39 years, I was associated in senior positions, first with the Washington Times, then with United Press International, which I also ran for a period of time, as well as for 10 years as their chief news analyst, and for the past decade, analyzing trends in US politics for the Washington Bureau of the Sputnik news agency. During my career, I have received, so far, I don't expect to get any more, 3 Pulitzer Prize nominations. I received them for covering the collapse of the Soviet Union and the subsequent expansion of NATO throughout Central and Eastern Europe. At the very beginning of this long period, I covered the start of a long golden age in at least coexistence and the reduction of tensions between the United States and the West on one side and Russia on the other. It started with a series of summit meetings between Presidents Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev that led to the 1987 Intermediate Nuclear Forces in Europe Treaty. I was also the State Department correspondent for the Washington Times for 6 years, from January 1993 to January 1999 through the 2 Clinton administrations. And that was when I witnessed the crucial switch in US thinking from the lazy and complacent, but much slower and casual drift towards extending NATO and US influence throughout Eastern Europe. They were always determined to do it, but they weren't in a rush at the beginning. They thought, as of course they still think, that history is on their side, most dangerous illusion. But their attitudes changed. That change was triggered by the horrors, small though they were by the standards of today's horrific Ukrainian conflict, of the Yugoslav civil wars from 1992 to 1995. I will intersperse here something I pointed out repeatedly in my analysis at the time for the Washington Times, and this is totally unknown and ignored in America, and I think there is at least some sense of it in Europe, and that is that the disintegration of Czechoslovakia and the collapse of Yugoslavia into its component wars was not the direct result of the years of Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe. It had much deeper roots. It goes back to the false borders imposed upon Europe by the liberal internationalists of Woodrow Wilson and his team at the Versailles Conference back in 1919. And based on that perspective, I predicted the disintegration of Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and predicted the current borders, which they have had for the last almost 30 years, in a series of articles where I personally designed the maps for them in the Washington Times in late 1989 and in 1990. That is how far the roots of the Yugoslav civil war in truth go. But this was not recognized, of course, by the Clinton administration. Americans are ignorant of Europe in general and principle, and in specifics, they will never take responsibility for their own historic screw-ups. It never happens. It is always everybody else's fault. So what was Bill Clinton's response to this? He changed his Secretary of State. When re-elected for his second term in January 1997, he replaced his passive, well-meaning, but slow and utterly useless, a very sweet man, I traveled extensively with him, Warren Christopher, with the narrow, intellectually narrow, but forceful, focused, very dark, hard-driving and obsessively Russian-hating daughter of Czech emigres, Madeleine Albright, who was also the personal protege and even puppet of former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. Now, I knew Brzezinski well and had excellent relations with him during my first decade in Washington. And there was a specific reason for it. I was reporting on the disintegration of the Soviet Union and then the weakness and enfeeblement of Russia under Boris Yeltsin. And Brzezinski was a racist. He was not a racist against Jews or Muslims or Palestinians. He was or any Asian people or Black people in America. He personally was involved in selecting and recommending to David Rockefeller that Barack Obama should become eventually a senator and president of the United States. But towards all Russian people, not just communism, but all Russians, Brzezinski was a deep-dyed racist of the most intense kind and never, ever wavered for it. And this is based not on reading his works or not just on close observation of him, but on personal interaction with him very closely over a 10-year period. Once Albright was appointed as Secretary of State in 1997, from then on, the drive to expand NATO eastward relentlessly, without limit and without end, to where we are today, without completely reckless way, with no consequence for any warnings of possibly reactions, which even Henry Kissinger was eventually belatedly moved to feebly attempt to warn them against. That drive became the bipartisan obsession of both the Republican and the Democratic Party foreign elites in Washington. Now, the first of being with Alistair and Anton, I'm in the company of heroic and outstanding window smashers, modern Martin Luthers, individuals who challenge and defy groupthink and the modern conventional consensus and orthodoxies of lies. Here is another challenge I put in. In my judgment, the main drive for this drive to expand NATO, and with continuing acceleration, like an ion drive, starting slowly but steadily and incrementally, building up speed so gradually that you don't even notice or be aware that it is happening. This did not primarily come or was driven by the giant American defense contractors, major powers and influences though they are. Like so many too large dinosaurs and other enormous grazing animal forms, they have no higher cognitive capability than the continuation and expansion through eternity, without limit, of their own profit margins, even if that will destroy America and destroy the world. They look beyond nothing else. But that means that they respond only to their immediate stimuli. In my close and sustained observation, the main driving force, the ion drive, if you will, of the drive to expand NATO and destroy Russia has come from the tail wagging the dog. All the ferociously anti-Russian mini-states of Eastern Europe and their close friends and agents of influence in Washington over the last 40 years, many of whose such agents I know very well. We see this, for example, with Lieutenant Colonel Vindeman, and his outright efforts, which in any other times would be described as treason, to undermine the policies of his own president, President Donald Trump, when Trump, who was very erratic, as we all know, was nevertheless trying to act responsibly in avoiding confrontation with Russia. And Vindeman and his colleagues were deliberately and openly, as a serving officer, undermining the foreign policy and national security policies openly set by the President of the United States. How do you define that? Sir John Harrington, the stepson of Queen Elizabeth I of England, defined it very well. Treason doth never prosper. Never. What's the reason? Why, if it prosper, none dare call it treason. Once the traitors have taken over control of the state or are writing the narrative of the state, history and truth, as George Orwell recognized so clearly, are redefined and rewritten immediately. The key to the past is the present. The present decides what the past will be, and so we see already again here. Now, further, these anti-Russian mini-states of Eastern Europe, operating through NATO, winning the goodwill and the immense financial resources of the gigantic defense contractors, because, of course, they need weapons and support without limit, which the United States government pays for because they, of course, cannot. So they have them on their side. They have consistently wielded, in my direct observation, over the past 40 years, far more influence in Washington than Israel and the Saudis combined. Now, the Israelis and the Saudis are again on opposite sides. For long periods of time, they were on exactly the same side against Iran. Everybody agrees correctly that they have enormous influence in Washington. I have worked for the Saudis. And long before that, I had very good relations with the Israelis, which did not last. And my career was deliberately truncated by AIPAC and officials in AIPAC from the 1990s onwards, because I was one of the few people. I was not even attacking them directly, but I was clearly not in their corner and critical of so many of the policies they insisted on, such as the invasion and destruction of Iraq. And you immediately felt it. The power was real. I underestimated that power for decades myself. I was a very slow learner. But of course, the power was real. But it is not as real remotely as the influence of the Eastern Europeans, spearheaded most of all by Brzezinski, but through all, and by the Poles, but also through the other countries of Eastern Europe. And their power is all the greater because it is never challenged. It is never identified. None dare call it, not even treason, none dare call it separate individual identities. But, and I have done studies on this, how do great empires die? They die when they are pulled into catastrophic wars they do not need to fight and should never fight by their own tiny satellite nations. Serbia pulled Russia into World War I. Belgium, a genocidal power that had killed 10 million people in Africa over the previous 30 years, pulled Britain and destroyed the British Empire by killing such a huge percentage of its most idealistic and patriotic individuals in World War I. This is how it happens. Poland pulled Britain and France, and even Germany for that matter, into a war none of them were expected to fight at that time in 1939. And now we are being pulled by Poland, by the non-democratic clique that has enslaved the Ukrainian people in Kiev, and by their allies across Eastern Europe, again into another far more catastrophic confrontation. And it is not in the national interest of the American people or the British people or any of the European peoples. So where does this leave us? It leaves us where we are, on the brink of Armageddon. We are already in a situation, as all of us here now recognize, where thermonuclear war can break out and annihilate us at any time. What is to be done? A very good question. First asked by a hero of my own teacher and mentor, Isaiah Berlin, by Nikolai Chernyshevsky in his seminal 1863 Russian novel, which was so good that Leo Tolstoy stole the title from him 2 decades later for his own little utopian, supposedly non-fiction piece of idealistic nonsense, because Tolstoy was arguably the greatest novelist who ever lived. But when it came to political thought and analysis, well, that's another story. Now, I would cite here to my own surprise, but I am impressed by it, 2 individuals have stood out alone, not dramatically, but significantly within the US, at the very top of the US power apex, in trying, and I think that unfortunately will be unable to do so for a variety of reasons we may discuss later, this drive towards Armageddon and towards nuclear war. And they are the generals. They are US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Charles C.Q. Jones. What have they done? They alone have tried to put a brake on the mad stampede of the Gadarene swine. I refer everyone again to the Gospel according to St. Matthew, to destroy civilization in a global war between Russia and the United States. It is General Jones and retired General Austin alone who at the latest meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, led by the United States as usual, held at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany as usual, on September the 6th this year, exactly 1 month ago, those 2 individuals alone tried to block and oppose and criticize Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's relentless demand for long-range strike weapons to hit strategic targets deep within Russia. They alone opposed it and genuinely tried to block it. Yet President Vladimir Putin has warned repeatedly and publicly and at length that this is the last red line in the eyes of the Russian government. And if it is crossed, Russia will respond. And not only will it respond, the president of Russia has spelled out in detail what that response will be. It will be maximum nuclear retaliation. To use the phrase that President Putin himself used publicly, a war like no other in the history of the world. I want to let that sink in. This most serious warning from the president of Russia. Now, I have covered President Putin professionally for a quarter of a century since he first took power in Russia. As we all know here, and as many of my friends and colleagues have pointed out, he is a serious, dignified man. He is a dangerous man to cross. But he is serious and dignified and patient. As used to be said about Franco in Spain, you have to work very hard to get arrested in Spain. But once you are, you will regret it. But you have to work hard to reach that point. This has been the policies of the Russian government towards the West in the last 30 years. They have put up with endless lies, endless breakings of assurances and treaties, endless encroachments, endless aggressions. The death of 14,000 ethnic Russians from US-supported terrorist actions against the populations of Lugansk and Donetsk when they effectively seceded from Ukraine, not in 1991, but when the genuine democracy in Ukraine was destroyed by direct European Union and US government action, openly endorsed by a US presidential, most recent Republican presidential candidate, John McCain, and the sitting Assistant Secretary of State for Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland, on the ground openly on international television in the Maidan coup of 2014. And yet no action was taken against these individuals. They were not impeached. They were not even criticized in the Congress. It took 14,000 Russian dead from these US-backed neo-Nazi attacks to bring Putin to this point. It took scores of thousands of casualties the Russian army itself has suffered in the conflict since 2022. Ukrainian casualties, of course, are vastly higher. At least 600,000 Ukrainian men and the entire remaining generation from ages 17 to 45 have already been propelled to their deaths by US policies. It is a matter of record that the average age of soldiers now being forced to serve by conscription in the non-democratic Ukrainian armed forces is 45. The death toll, I personally believe, is now much more likely 700,000 to 750,000. And that is a level of casualty and trauma that the United States only suffered during the Civil War, when its population was 30 million. Which is higher than Ukraine's remaining population is today, and this is more than 160 years ago. Urgency of action is therefore required. But the problem here is, and I modify my comments here slightly, because I was assuming in the last two presentations there were more full-time academics present. And I see here that most of you, bless you, come with serious academic backgrounds, but also from wider backgrounds too. So my criticisms, as I close here, are not geared towards you, but are towards many of the comments which were made in discussion, though not by the outstanding speakers in the previous sessions. For academics always have zero impact on outsiders, on policymakers, on senators, Congress members, and government diplomats. And it is very important, if we hope to influence policy, as of course we do, that we recognize this. Because anyone within the system, within any system, is convinced that any of us, even if we have all been part of the system or eminent in the system in the past, because we are out of it now, they are superior to us, and therefore they know better. I've seen this repeatedly over the last 45 years in my career, everywhere, from on a tiny scale in Northern Ireland to Washington, D.C., and certainly in London. It is a universal human state of mind, and we must recognize it if we are going to combat it and overcome it. Secondly, conferences such as this, I write here, are a waste of time. Well, they are necessary, they are valuable, but we have to recognize our limits as well. the crafting of endless, dignified, long, carefully produced declarations and statements are basically a waste of time. Nobody pays any attention to them, and a huge disproportionate amount of our energy goes into crafting them. Even bringing out 1 million people onto the streets of Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York City would be a waste of time. In New York, in Washington, D.C., they would simply ignore it, and the media would not show it. Because it happens all the time. And I have agreement with this on the most successful organizer of anti-war and anti-nuclear conferences in the Western world of our time. Dr. Helen Caldicott of Australia, a very dear personal friend over the past quarter century, and a columnist for me during my decade at UPI. And why did she write for me? Because nobody else would touch her. She was out of fashion. She wasn't even being directly slandered. She was simply out of fashion. So we got her for free at UPI. And she is a Nobel laureate. She created and founded and led Physicians for Social Responsibility, which under her leadership and under nobody else since then, routinely turned out 500,000 to 750,000 people in mass demonstrations across North America and across Europe. So today, what would you need? You would need to be able to, by my estimation, to peacefully mobilize 2 million people. 1 million would not be enough, because 1 million people are usually claimed as having turned out to support Kamala Harris, or to oppose abortion, or to support abortion, or for anything under the sun. So the impact is diluted. The impact is diluted. You would need 2 million people on the streets of Washington, and the powers that be would probably be able to discredit even that. So what do I advise to all of us here? Well, first of all, again, something outrageous and simple. I urge everyone to watch and rewatch a movie that has just come out and has proven highly successful across America. Reagan, starring Dennis Quaid, directed by Sean McNamara and written by Howard Klausner. It is not a particularly good movie. It is mindlessly worshipful towards the old president. But I was there covering the events of the time, and I met Reagan personally several times. And on the events it focuses on, for all the liberties it takes and that any Hollywood movie is going to be guilty of, it is surprisingly accurate on the points that matters. Incidentally, it has not been banned in Russia. There is open access to it there, but it is not popular, because its view on Russia, of course, is very skewed as well. So I am not defending or recommending the balance or overall historical accuracy of the movie. But the movie gets the key central points about Reagan recognizing, coming to belatedly, but like Kennedy, in good time, to the recognition above all to avoid thermonuclear war. On that, it is absolutely right and accurate. Reagan, the arch anti-communist, came to terms with President Mikhail Gorbachev because, like President John Kennedy before him, President Reagan was forced in the crises of 1983, especially the false alert when Russian censors thought a nuclear attack was coming from the West, and they went to their own first state of response and readiness. Turned out to be a flock of geese. And of course, this is exactly what happens when you rely on AI, when you rely on automatic systems and computers, even if they're not trying to kill all of you. They make mistakes. They make more mistakes than human beings do. And of course, this is never acknowledged either. The more we rely on AI and the more complex our systems become, the more they will break down and the more they will doom us to destruction, right? But Reagan was forced, like President Kennedy, to face the reality of what thermonuclear war would really mean. Today, totally senile, 81-year-old, going on for 82, President Joe Biden cannot begin to grasp that reality, even if he ever could. Vice President Kamala Harris, who is his designated successor, has never all her life displayed the slightest cognitive or imaginative capabilities of being able to do so either. Now, I do not have to defend, and I'm not going to, any of Donald Trump's failed and irresponsible financial policies when he was president of the United States, or his ludicrous and totally catastrophic appointments of Mike Pompeo as the CIA director and Secretary of State, or of John Bolton as National Security Advisor, or of the free hand he gave Benjamin Netanyahu, who I believe, and again, this is for a discussion on another time, a dangerous certifiable lunatic, far more irrational and incompetent not just extreme, but irrational and incompetent than he is given any recognition for. And he will be given a free hand again, without question, if Trump gets in. All of this is true. Yet, however, in addition, in his presidential debate with Kamala Harris, it was still only Trump who raised and recognized the need to end the Ukraine war at once and prevent the cataclysmic slide into a thermonuclear conflict. It was only he who expressed a recognition of the need to end the slaughter of the Ukrainian people, who are not fighting for any kind of democracy. Their democracy was snuffed out in the Maidan coup, which the US and the European Union directed back in 2014. They have been directed as cannon fodder by the Biden administration and its allies ever since. Nothing else. They have died for nothing. And now, did Kamala Harris recognize this? No. She never mentioned the threat of nuclear war or the dangers of how the Ukraine war could escalate once. She used her typical tough talking points going back. I always say about neoconservatives, and now it is the entire foreign policy of the United States and the entire supposed thinking culture of at least 100 million people in America. This is their conception of history. The history begins at the Munich sellout in 1938. And it ends with the Battle of Britain, or maybe Pearl Harbor in 1941. There are no lessons to be learned from before 1938 or after 1941. Everything is defined as a moral lesson. We didn't stand up to Hitler and put him in his place. We must stand up to Putin or Saddam or whoever the label is. Scratch out Hitler and put in whoever our designated target of the place is. That is the American conception of history that is believed not just by Joe Biden and Antony Blinken and certainly the hapless Jake Sullivan, but by 100 million people who've had it brainwashed into them in what passes for higher education in America. But higher education in America is worse than any higher education ever was in the Soviet Union. Nobody doubts it. Nobody is encouraged to doubt it. Nobody thinks. It is entirely systematic. You are simply brainwashed. You are brainwashed with fixed courses, and you have to give the appropriate answer. And on that, you are graded as given A, B, C, D, E's, and an A is by definition a genius. And then, much more important, you learn to lick the behinds of whoever is above you. And that is why we have the secretaries of state we have today, and that is why we have the national security advisors we have today. So Trump is the only slim hope, and I grant you it is slim, and I would agree with all the critiques that were made of him in previous sessions here. Defending them? Of course it is. And yet he's all we've got left. And I believe Senator Vance would actually do a better job, but would be certainly recognizes the dangers of thermonuclear war, the lack of necessity of being sucked into it. One more point I finally want to briefly address, and that nobody here, to your credit, has mentioned it so far, and I don't expect you will, but there were several serious voices for this last time. The idea that a vote for Jill Stein, whom I personally debated on Iranian television a decade ago, is a moral or realistic choice is absurd. Ms. Stein is a nice, well-meaning lady, but she is ineffably ignorant and stupid. She hasn't a clue. I do not expect many people here, still even in this audience, to accept this. But that is what I caution you against, not to remain convinced that your own moral fastidiousness, if you have it, so dear to you. The English breed on this, of course, while they permit genocides and exterminations around the world. That people who love their own moral fastidious too much will die in thermonuclear hellfire rather than accept simple but inconvenient facts. I despise Al Gore on every ground imaginable, but at least we owe him one thing, the concept of the inconvenient fact. It is a very crucial tool to clear thinking and analysis and shaving with Occam's razor. A vote for Jill Stein is a vote for thermonuclear war. It is a cowards and hypocrites vote. It is an abdication of moral responsibility to the American people and to the human race. The only course of action, now, fine point, for any of us, realistically, that offers any hope that we may make a difference, is this, that each of us as individuals, and actually I think we're more effective as individuals than we would be signing a large document. People's eyes glaze over when they look at documents. I don't expect all the 200 former senior Republican officials signing that document against Trump to influence anyone whatsoever. They're influencing themselves. That makes them feel good. The only course for any of us, and it's a real course, is to do our individual utmost to influence directly as individuals any policymaker or influencer that we can personally reach in the power system to end the sending at once of any long-range strike weapons to Ukraine. We need to start by being very specific about this. This is the Russian red line. If we can block this, if anyone can block this, we buy time for negotiation. We buy time for other things. But if we don't block this, we won't have time. There are still one or two senators, and I can only think of two, and I am open to others. I'm sure there must be others. Curiously enough, there are more individuals in the Senate I think we can reach right now than members of the House. But the two individuals for me who come to mind are Rand Paul and Josh Hawley, both significantly Republican heartland senators who would once be called, no doubt are called again now, isolationists. However, in contrast, leading hawks of both the Republican and Democratic parties, from the Cheney family, very dark, to the appalling Senator Marco Rubio, to Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, all of them need to be abused verbally in every public appearance and asked why they personally are so determined to see their own children and grandchildren burned alive. It must be made graphic to them. It must be brought home to them as individuals. They must see the image of their own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren screaming as they die, cursing the people who put them into this situation. Nothing else will break through the hardened attitudes that for decades and generations have led them and therefore led the world to this spot. Now, this is simple, direct, and extreme, but it is also peaceful, lawful, and democratic politics. I most certainly do not advocate lawlessness because, apart from anything else, lawless protest plays into the hands of the deep state and gives them excuse and justification for crackdowns and further repression, which, of course, is why so many actions by them have deliberately sought to provoke such outrages systematically over generations. It's an old story, as I think we all know. I recognize that the policy of screaming personal abuse at 84-year-old Nancy Pelosi, who deserves it as virtually nobody else does, will be embarrassing and disgusting to many people. But there is no other path, I believe, left to us in the fragment of time we have left to try and save the human race. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, I mean, I think that we've all discovered that we don't grow when we're in comfort zones. So I'm really happy that we're creating a discomfort blanket here to get some really good conversation going about the future and about where we really are at. And what I really appreciate about you, Marty, is that you don't only bring a lot of historical discoveries and insights into your considerations for these sorts of dialogues, but also frontier on the ground experience, direct experience where you've actually been on the front lines in Washington and Oxford. For many years. So I do appreciate that feedback and this type of conversation. So good kindling for the fires. We now are going to open up for Anton Chaitkin, a good friend of mine, somebody who I've studied for many years. His book recently, I just finished reading this, Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress from Franklin to Kennedy. Volume 1, Volume 2 is about to come out. And Anton has been a geopolitical analyst, a historian who's made a lot of groundbreaking discoveries that I've found high value in my own research. And I'm really happy that Anton, a man committed to peace and for solution orientation, has accepted the request to speak to us today. So Anton, it's all yours. And you're on mute, by the way. You have to unmute.
Mute. There we go.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Alistair, for your unsettling and brilliant proposal, Alistair. And Marty, I think that your discussion of treason in Washington and what it constitutes really opens up a real question and a fountain, doesn't it? I wrote a book about that, and there are certain points of understanding of what the concept means that I really want to get into here, because you can't simply define treason as somebody has the right way, or a nation has a certain way, and then somebody betrays that way. Who are these people? What's it about? There's a dynamic. And so I want to pose what I believe is a fact of history that I've been able to help to develop in my recent work, that the traditional enemy of the United States, a transatlantic oligarchy, a faction, our traditional enemy, the enemy of our country, runs the strategy of the United States today, in this era. And I want to bring up some points about particularly the Middle East that have to do with religion and deception. And a conference many years ago where I was having some fun exposing Pat Robertson and various other very foolish people. I appeared to before the conference wearing a garland of garlic, and that was in order to show that we're dealing with some real ghouls, like Dracula, and that we have to have an element of fun in doing this, because the enemy, in a sense, is flat. They have secrets, but they don't. They and they're very proud of that and show it off. But the ordinary work of creative people who have love and who have a skill that have made advances is secret from them. They don't understand it, and they're raging. They're raging all the time about that. You have to keep that in mind. So there's a two-sided background to treason in Washington. And of course, this has to do with the Republic, our American Republic, as the example in our era, good example, and the empire. The Republic represents the self in one way, and the empire represents the self in the other way, the relationship of the self to the common good. The empire is the self versus the common good, and the Republic is this, where the self is the fountain of the common good. That's a kind of a framework. I want to go back to set just to give a little window to understand what's happening now. Back to the 19th century, where our enemy, the empire, the British Empire, and their people in Washington or in New York, but it was the British Empire almost entirely then, where they planted seeds and set up things that are blowing up now in the Middle East. And so I want to go through just a few points to illustrate the two sides that are operating, and that operate all throughout our history, up through the 20th century, up into even later times. So this there was a period starting with about 1860, what I would call Lincoln's America, in many ways operating to the 1890s, but for about 20 years, from 1860 to 1880, an intense period of American Republic action and self awareness to build a new world. The headquarters for this action and this strategy was in Philadelphia with the economic nationalists. And they were building a new world inside the USA and as a bridge to other aspiring nations. At the same time, the British were building up their empire, notably in Africa. You know, Cecil Rhodes, people talk about him a lot, but remember that him and Milner and these people set up apartheid. And many philosophical ideas associated with that. It was first in the mines in South Africa. So some high points of this to give you an idea about the two sides in America and in the world. In the 1870s, we had an ambassador in Japan. His name was John Bingham. Went there when US was sponsoring the industrialization of Japan. And he went there and he said, Japan has to use their talent to build industry, and they need to have peace with China. And he said, as the US ambassador, that he based himself on the idea from St. Paul that all men are of one blood. President Grant, former President Grant, went to Japan to back him up and urged Japan to have peace with China. We had had a treaty with China, the Burlingame Treaty, which was a brilliant, contained a proposal with respect for China, that China should, when they're ready, use American experts to build railroads. But Grant said, don't allow foreign capital to get you in a debt trap. He made those speeches over there while he was there. At the time, the British were trying to rescue their empire in Asia from this influence. And by the end of the 1890s, they had built the entire navy for Japan to be used against the United States and Russia, by definition, at the time. Go back to, again, 1880s, where Thomas Edison had a partner named Emil Rathenau in Germany. In Eastern Europe and Russia, Rathenau built up the electricity there, introduced electrification. Edison had fought the British banker Morgan, and transatlantic banker, to be able to build power plants. Rathenau was able to outflank what was the terrible degeneration of politics under British influence in Eastern Europe at the time, to bring electricity, spread it. We have the Tata family came from India, and they came to Pennsylvania, where the nationalists were building our steel mills, and they asked for help to build steel mills in India. And American engineer went there, and they built up the first steel mills of India. These things are representative of the entire policy of the United States to build up within our country massive new kinds of scientific powers, and to spread this everywhere else. The British now. We also have this, by the way, Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith in Ireland. These are revolutionaries all the way up to the 1920s, who had been part of Henry Carey's organization that goes back to the 1870s. The Trans-Siberian Railroad being built at the turn of before the end of the 19th century. All of the equipment is being produced massively, shipped over the rails, the steel, the locomotives from Pennsylvania to build that Russian enterprise. So the British had a project to accompany their project in Africa, and that was in the Middle East, long before they had a mandate. There was a fellow named Sir Charles Warren, and this man was famous later on because Sir Charles Warren was the head of Scotland Yard briefly, and he is famous for covering up Jack the Ripper's murders on behalf of the royal family. There's you mentioned a movie. There's a great little movie called Murder by Decree. It's about Jack the Ripper with Christopher Plummer and James Mason. Sir Charles Warren is the villain in the movie. Now, Sir Charles Warren wrote a proposal. He went to Palestine shortly after, or around the same time as the Prince of Wales went there, who became King Edward the VII, to muck around in the ruins of the ancient temple and other things, and whether or not they even saw very much of anything, it doesn't matter, because they wrote extensively about it and developed gossip and put this gossip out. And they also formed, while they are making these proposals for what they want to do there, the mischief they want to make, they formed various cults and secret societies, particularly new Masonic organizations. So Sir Charles Warren wrote this in 1875. My proposal is to allow a company similar to the old East India Company to govern and farm Palestine for 20 years. Now remember, at this time, the Ottoman Empire governs that region, right? It's not British or Jewish or anything else. It's just Ottoman Empire, and the Arabs live there. So let's set up a new East India Company to govern and farm Palestine for 20 years. Let this be done with the intention of gradually introducing the Jew, pure and simple, who is eventually to occupy and govern this country. Let the Jew find his way into its army, its law, its diplomatic service. Let this continue until the Jewish principality may stand by itself, either under Istanbul, if Turkey still exists, or else as a separate kingdom guaranteed by the great powers. Now, at the same time, this fellow and his friends in their lodge said that there is a true belief that the Jews it has to be understood that this is the true belief of Jews, and it's Kabbalism. It's not the Bible, it's not the Torah. And Christians should pay attention to this too, that whatever we're discovering by digging up ruins in the Middle East is now the true religion. Complete mumbo jumbo with a lot of tips from Masonry on what history means. Populists would go nuts. Oh my God, I know about this. I heard this. Oh, it all sounds pretty interesting, but who are these guys anyway? So one of the offspring of this assignment of Kabbalism to the Jews as what they must adopt as their religion was Abraham Kook. You can't make these things up. This is the name of the guy. He's a rabbi named Kook. And he and his son were the founders of the settlers movement, the mass insane, people who want to eat everyone else there and take over the Middle East and spread insanity and murder. Kook became the chief rabbi of Palestine under the British mandate, and his whole point of view is expressed here by Sir Charles Warren, and who's the leader of what was called the Palestine Exploration Fund. You can go look this all up. So we have now to look back at Edward VII, who became King of England, while Teddy Roosevelt became the president of the United States. They worked together in developing the conditions for the Great World War that they wanted. Edward VII had heirs, and his heirs are in this way, in the way that I've described to you. They are our problem today in many respects in the world. Let's define the point of view of people in power who propose things without worrying whether they are, and completely ignoring the evidence that they're propelling everyone off a cliff to our common doom. If you go back to Edward VII, and you look at him as a monarch, and he and his friends as upper class rulers of a huge domain, it's been said that they would rather not live in a world they do not rule. They don't think of mankind's future as parents. And so I think you could say the same thing about the various committees of people and individuals that make up this oligarchy and this collection of people setting the real extreme people pushing and pushing without regard to taking us over the edge.
Hey, Anton, I'm super sorry. This is the most fascinating presentation. I really appreciate it, but we have to wrap it up for the Q&A dialogue session.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that's basically it. The question, the question I would ask is, are all those close to the levers of power with this kind of satanic, literally satanic, because of what the kind of religious ideas and so forth they've raised is by their own definition satanic. Does everybody close to the levers of power share this kind of point of view? I don't believe so. And I think that because competence needs some kind of pro-human element. So that's my contribution from the annals of history.
Okay. This is a treat of 3 very high-end presentations. Difficult to decide how to formulate questions, because I mean, my mind is just really I feel like I've really been given a lot to chew on, but I think we're all feeling the same thing. There are a couple of people who got in with some questions early on. By the way, for some of the remarks that Anton was making, if you look in the chat box, I included a link to some material for those who would like to follow up on some of this challenging material. It's there for people to look at after this thing is finished, so save that. I noticed that Ken Freeland, Tony Papart got on with questions. Elisa is there, so we have maybe 25-30 minutes. What do you think, Ed? By the way, would you like to say? I almost forgot, Ed. Did you want to finish this little rounding with some considerations on your end?
I just want to add one point about 2 senators that Martin mentioned. Today, actually, I found another senator. His name is Tommy Tuberville from Alabama.
Yes.
And he made a statement not just somewhere on campaign trail. He made a statement in the Senate on the floor, and his statement probably is more powerful than all the harshest critic of Biden ever made, including us. And he demanded from Biden immediately to start peace negotiations with Russia. And also we know that October 12th is coming up, and Biden is going to Ramstein to deliver his kind of final speech. I call it Swan Song. And Swan Song, let me make sure that I read it exactly what songs means. It's when someone is finishing his career he's making one of the most important statements about what he did. And this will be about Ukraine, of course. And what Tudorville said, that unless he actually goes into, instead of providing more money in weapons, and of course, especially long-range missiles, he starts peace negotiation with Moscow, then we'll be in big trouble. So we have now a powerful ally on the US Senate floor. It's very, usually those days you rarely get some good news. So this was a good news. Okay, this is simply notice to Martin and all of us.
Yeah, we definitely need those good news blips. So yes, very important. Thank you. All right, so let's open up for a brief Q&A period. And like I said, we've got about 25, maybe 30 minutes. So try to keep your questions brief, and the answers will be, well, as brief as they can possibly be based on the question. So first up, we've got Ken Freeland. Ken.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me, Matt?
Sure.
Great. All right. So, Martin, I really, really, really appreciated everything you said, with one exception, which I'll get to. It was a very enlightening presentation. However, your political conclusions, I take umbrage with, and this is why. Okay. You claim that those who support Jill Stein or other alternative candidates are being morally fastidious. I would really strongly differ with that. And I want to remind everybody of Dostoevsky's famous question. If you could have paradise on earth, but the price of it would be the harm to this one small child, would you take it? Okay. If there was only one issue in front of us, and that would be thermonuclear war prospects, I would have to agree with your conclusion, Martin. But there is another one, and that's the genocide in Palestine. Now, are we supposed to think that it's okay to have presidential candidates elected who are going to continue to support the genocide in order to get nuclear war off the table? I say no. I'm sorry. No. N-O. Okay? That's where I come from. It's not being morally fastidious. It's being morally responsible. Where do we access Matt, where do we access the archive of these?
Go to Rising Tide Foundation YouTube channel if you want, but I'm gonna. That's your question, right? Your intervention. Are you finished?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
Okay, Marty, you want to address that?
Yes, just briefly. You can hear me, okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. The answer is I'm not asking you to be quiet about that at all, but whichever of them gets in is going to support Netanyahu blindly. They both are. We know that. They're both in his pocket. But if thermonuclear war comes, then everything goes. Everyone goes. If we can avoid thermonuclear war, I'm not saying stay silent on this. Attack Trump at the same time. You put him in as the marginally less evil on this thing. But this is exactly the kind of point I make. I voted for President Obama twice. I wasn't a wild enthusiastic supporter, as my friends, as Ed especially well knows. I regard myself, at least perhaps delusionally for many years now, as a lifelong conservative. But we were faced with a maniac, and who was a quite literal maniac in John McCain, and a very sinister predator in what's his name, the 2012 candidate, Romney. In the case of Romney. So again, it was a relative choice. Similarly, I did not think Senator Kerry would have made a good president had he won in 2004, but he was infinitely preferable to the simplistic lunatic who we had at the time. Now, as I stressed in the points I was making, I expected this kind of response. I simply do not agree with you. I am not blind to it. I'm not asking anyone to stay silent on what's happening in Gaza. Attack them mercilessly. Jared Kushner and Trump are totally in Netanyahu's pocket. This needs to be exposed endlessly. Some of the most important people who we can hope to have will not be in any Trump administration, precisely because the AIPAC people and Kushner and their friends will blackball them. This is abominable and appalling. But relative to Harris. And given the realities of the world we live in and the choice we have to play for time. And that doesn't mean staying silent for a minute on the Gaza issue. At least I can thank you. I disagree with you with respect, so I see, of course, where you're coming from, but I disagree with you strongly. But I thank you for making the point. It needs to be made, and for clarifying my own position that in no way do I want to use this as an excuse to stay silent or suppress the popular grassroots drive to end the slaughter in Gaza. No way. No way. That needs to be the only way, in fact, to approach Trump on this would be to say to him, you recognize the danger in Ukraine, it'll set off a world war. That's exactly what's happening here. That's exactly what will happen here, because it will pull in Iran, and that will pull in Russia, and it will pull in China. So absolutely. So I disagree with you on the specific tactical point, obviously, still, but it's a very valid question to ask. And thank you for raising it in the form you did.
Well, say the lesser of the evils is still an evil. Thank you for your response.
All right. Thanks, Ken. All right. Tony Pappert is up next. Tony, you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks. I mean, not to glance over the other two speakers, but I benefited greatly over the years reading Martin Sieff's columns. I've never heard him speak, and I was very moved. I mean, I see that he's never lost the courage he's shown, as I've known, throughout the years. And he showed it, as the discussion even has shown already, he showed it in part by telling this audience that President Trump is the only hope to avoid nuclear war. And it's true. I mean, if I understood him, that's what I heard him say. Nuclear war is on the ballot in a few days over 1 month. And if Kamala Harris wins, I don't think it'll wait until 2025. I think it may come as soon as November or December.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, as I see it also, and this was alluded to in the Q&A that just took place, another huge factor has entered the picture now over the past few days, which is that, as Martin knows more than me, I think there's a powerful faction. He didn't mention it, but there's a powerful faction in Washington and London which believes that the only way the U.S. can solve its problems is to go to war with Iran. Yes. And there's, it seems that the coming days may give an opportunity for those who have been salivating for it, including Bibi Netanyahu, for a U.S. war with Iran. So, I mean, again, for all the criticisms of Trump, during his term in office, he stood in the way in this famous incident, if only then, this famous incident of the shooting down of a U.S. drone. He stood in the way of a war with Iran, which was intended to happen at just that moment. So, I mean, that's what Martin Sieff has shown the courage, in my view, to step out before an audience like this, before his associates and his friends and the public, with a very unpopular stand, but one which is necessary. That the hope to avoid thermonuclear war is Trump. I mean, I think all of us must have the courage to come forward now, not perhaps the Russians on this call or Canadians, but the U.S. citizens. This may be our last chance. That's it.
Thank you, Tony, for the contribution. Any from the speakers? Anybody want to chime in from Tony's remarks, or do we move on to the next question?
Thank you, Tony.
All right, there we go. Elisa.
Hi. Now, for coming from a totally different direction, I read Matthew's book and I read Cynthia's book, The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set. And after the first chapter of Cynthia's book, I needed to reach for an antidote to that because I don't like the taste of vomit in my mouth. So I started picking up Mark Twain. And this little book has been very helpful. I've been carrying it around. I've been trying to find things that will help me to speak to my family who think Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I say.
Exactly.
There's a certain enjoyment my mother has in hating Trump that's sort of cathartic for her. So, that's going to be how it is. But this is The Innocents Abroad. I read it over the summer. I carried it on my cruise ship trip to Alaska. It helped me as an ambassador to bridge the gap because Mark Twain visits the Russian royal family. There's descriptions of the Bosphorus. There's a trip from Palestine down through the Holy Land, and I love it. He makes fun of everybody, and he makes fun of everybody equally, which to me is the most egalitarian thing. He spares no one. And as an evangelical Christian, I probably have the reaction that he was intending when he's ridiculing all of the monuments of the holy sites and kind of poking fun at kind of because they're on the Quaker City and he's traveling with a whole bunch of extremely stuffed shirt evangelical Christians. I think that element matters because I've grown up in the evangelical church myself. And I know from talking to people that one of the big pushes is not coming from Jews necessarily, but the evangelical church. And in order to reach evangelicals, you need to speak evangelical. And I know a little bit about this, and this is helpful there. As another piece of the puzzle, I graduated Trinity Western University in 1995, and I read this series called The Chronicles of Zion. This was at the Christian University bookstore. Now, to me, I didn't know anything about geopolitics. I just read this series as a bunch of romance novels, and I wasn't thinking anything. But it's all about a sales pitch about the whole Zion thing. Now, churches women outnumber men in the church about 5-1. So women read romance novels. So if you want to know how Christians are propagandized about stuff like this is one of those pieces. It's by Bodhi Taney.
Okay. All right, thank you, Lisa.
Anyway.
No, I've taken note of these, and I'm actually going to read. I love Mark Twain, and I'm going to read his Innocents Abroad actually. And what you're saying is important. I mean, this is an important. Even though we may not necessarily respect all of the ideologies at play, the fact is the ideologies at play in the world right now are affecting our future. So it's important to be able to immerse ourselves in the shoes of other groupings from different cultures. And what you've just said is very important. The Christian Zionist movement that really, really got lit on fire in the 19th century is a major driving force in a lot of very bad decisions that have justified forever wars abroad for very, very righteous reasons that are using a lot of duped fools who don't realize what religion should be actually about.
But so I think the satire element is the best weapon. I think satire works better than a clenched, pumped fist and people yelling.
Amen. Yeah. Laughter, humor is the best way to break people out of an intellectual cage. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. All right. We got a time for a couple, maybe two more questions. So let's go for Robert. You still there?
Hi, I'm here. Sorry,
Hey.
just it's definitely a mixed crowd, and certainly I understand that it's hard to unite people around one idea, even if it's the idea that we're all against thermonuclear war, which we should be. And I do wonder for the people out there with obviously Vladimir Putin had actually a remarkably good relationship with Netanyahu at one point. And I do wonder if sometimes if we could improve U.S.-Russia relations, could we potentially be able to have, if U.S.-Russia relations were much better and we could avoid nuclear conflict, then I think it would be easier to focus on how these powers could come together and maybe even begin the process of negotiating some kind of settlement to the Middle East. But of course, that's pie in the sky. I guess my question now is, as far as what we can do between now and the election, I agree that Trump is frankly the only alternative. But for those who don't, I guess my question is what can we do between now and then? What can this group do? Or this, is it about an event? Is it about a column? Is it about something? If we're talking about bringing 2 million people to, say, New York or Washington, what are we committed to doing now? I guess I'd say to the panelists.
All right. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, if I could just come in, could I come in on that one?
Of course, Alistair. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something I've been involved in for some time with UNIT. I've talked to Ed about it. I mean, there is a sense of thinking, we're all having these discussions, and there's a sense of preaching to the converted. I mean, we're all kind of on the same page, and we're fairly well read, etc. Some of us very well read. The problem is we have with these positions where you have a what I call a bought and paid for media, which are basically a propaganda arm of the government. Let's talk about the Western government. There is no alternative. There is no realistic backstory to what's going on. And again, let me come back again to Ukraine. I mean, we have over 600 MPs in Westminster, and only twice has the Ukraine question been raised, and it was shut down quickly. And I mean, we are supposed to have a government, and this is all over Europe. All of our governments are supposed to be representing the people, and there's been no referral whatsoever to the people on the question of Ukraine. And I mean, this is the problem. Everyone is just shut down. The thing I find is, how do we get this over? Because there's nothing we can do. It was mentioned before, I think Marnie said it, that, it doesn't matter how many things we write or whatever, it's going to make no difference. But we somehow have to get these realities out to, we have to get them to the public domain. And I mean, otherwise we are, we're just whistling in the wind. And this is my big thing. You try and get things out there, and I mean, I can't get any mentions here at all. I'm only talking to the Russian press, and I mean, who are already kind of agreeing with what I'm saying. Exactly. And by the way, let me just quickly add here that I've been called a Kremlin spook. I've been called, all these kind of things, which is the usual thing. And even my own editors thought with some of my articles that I've been given the copy by the Kremlin, and that's the reality. But we cannot get any. I don't know what it's like in the American press. I think it's very much the same. That any Western press, there is just no traction for anything other than the government position, the Western position, and that is going to be the problem. Nobody else. Who knows about thermonuclear war in Joe Public? If you talk to a guy, but you won't know what you're talking about. I mean, that's a stark reality. Our people know, friends of ours, people we talk to, everyone here. However, the reality is the man in the street who is really the one it matters to, he doesn't know anything is going on. And I mean, that's the truth of it. That's the reality of it. And we have to get into realities here.
Yeah.
All right, Alistair, thank you. Anton, or
just very, very quickly. What should we do? Martin talked about 2 men in the administration who had some action to head off the madness. And now behind that, history is screaming at us from John Kennedy and from even Reagan, but from our earlier history, that the people going off the cliff with the country and the world say there is no history. That's what Martin was emphasizing. That the history, in fact, they define history of being 1938 to 41, precisely when the U.S. and the U.K. came together around the necessity of fighting Hitler. But so what I would say is that the previous history of the United States and of its best leaders is shouting at us. That has to be brought up by somebody around in an effective way, with wit, with some real courage around these people that will take action inside the administration. We used to embarrass people with counterintelligence inside the government, who are the really worst bad actors. But I would say, let's bring history of what we were before this insanity to come out all around the people that will do something within the government here, and even in the UK. That history is shouting at us of what we are and what we were. So bring it up, make fun of these people, bring it up, embarrass them, and get this as the action principle for people who will do anything within the government, whether it's under Trump or whoever's going to be the next president, or right now. So that's what we should do, I think.
You can call it the Ace Ventura election. Einhorn is Finkel. Finkel is Einhorn. The Republican and Democratic establishments are one and the same.
Well, the uniparty is the uniparty. It's pretty exposed for what it is now. So the question is, can we actually get people in tune with what America's better forgotten traditions actually were, as Anton just said, such that we can look towards the future with a little bit more of a productive mode? And I would just say one thing on that point. My wife and I, Cynthia, we just returned from a speaking tour of Canada. And one thing is that there's a big push to install long-range missiles in the Canadian Arctic right now, as part of this broader encirclement. And one of the focuses of every single place I gave speeches was to get Canadians to be aware of that, as well as Americans. I mean, Alaska plays a big role in this. And to be aware that, back in September of 2020, Donald Trump did pass an executive order calling for the extension of rail through Alberta into Alaska and the upper territories as part of a broader package of development. And it was obviously axed as soon as Biden came in. But that idea was offered by Putin on 2 occasions to the West. Ed Luzansky has given many presentations over the years promoting the Bering Strait Rail Tunnel and the development of the Arctic as a platform for peace, instead of a platform for war, which is otherwise what certain war hawks would wish it to be. So I think this, when you go back to reading Anton's work, reading a lot of this deeper history, the fact of the battleground of the Arctic, the sale of Alaska from the Russians to the Americans, the idea of Lincoln to extend rail and telegraph lines into Russia via that pathway, that really is an important dynamic, which the oligarchy, which is thinking very long term in the past and into the future, they're very aware of the importance of the Arctic. Many people, unfortunately, have been cut off from that awareness. So they don't appreciate what Putin's offer actually represent, or what China's Polar Silk Road offers as a potential for peace, or what Trump's proposal actually represented. So that's something that I think we're going to be doing in an upcoming roundtable, is a focus on the Arctic, which I think, Ed, I'm seeing some nodding of approval there.
Yeah, I just want to mention something about if you have a good column, there are at least 3 large publications with millions of subscribers. Probably you could try, and I had luck because I used to be a columnist for Washington Times, working with Martin, not anymore. Well, occasionally they just allow me say something. But now, for example, antiwar.com, americanthinker.com, and the Consortium News. Those 3, all of them have millions of subscribers, and so I'm lucky that they publish my work. Occasionally I send them to you. So I suggest, if you really have a good piece, send to one of them or to all of them. And this can probably, they will take it. I just want to say that I mentioned already October 12th. Something is going to happen on October 12th, because Biden is going to say something. So next time we are going to meet on October 20. So maybe by that time, hopefully there will be no World War III yet. But October 12th, it's a very important day. So tighten your belts.
Amen. All right. I'm very happy that we had such a productive discussion, and really there's so much fuel for the fires of thought and of conversation. Hopefully people have been a little bit more empowered to make more discoveries, to be communicators and instruments for peace. And that's really the whole point of this thing. So help get the word out, bring in more people in your networks, family, friends who are on the fence about where the world's going, and try to push them onto the good side of the fence, and sign up and register on Ed's website, which is available in the description box under this video, so that they can also take part in these discussions. We're going to be continuing this in 2 weeks' time. Eventually, we might do this every week if we can get enough support for this. But until then, this has been really good. Thank you, everybody, and as far as the speakers, and thank you for all of the attendees. Looking forward to meeting everybody in 2 weeks' time. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.